So I will let Garrett take this part.
Oh, sorry, I had to unmute there quick. Yeah, so Chris did a good job there overviewing the Green Party's platform, which is pretty long, so that was a good summary, with the key signature policy being the Green New Deal. And all of the Green Party's work is based in the key values. So before we move on to talk more about today's Green Party structure and how you can get involved, I want to take a moment to kind of review some of the Green Party history so you kind of understand where the party came from and sort of understand how it's organized and what sort of achievements have been made so far that we can build on. So, yeah, next slide, yeah. So the first is a reminder that the Green Party is both an activist organization and an electoral party. A lot of folks don't realize that because the capitalist duopoly has trained us, taught us that parties are just things that you sign up for, and then you vote once every 4 years or whatever, and then you have no say, no control or whatever in the system, right? And that's not our vision of what a political party should be. And our vision should be that obviously we get involved in elections, but elections are not the only way to be involved in a democracy. And in fact, depending on what you're trying to do, some of the action might be most effective starting from an activist point of view. So the Green Party strives to be both an activist organization and an electoral party that runs candidates. All right, so going back in time and looking a little bit more at the history of the party, you can trace the roots of the Green Party honestly back to the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. So in that kind of post-World War II period, you saw a lot of change in U.S. culture with a lot of movements coming up to fight for liberation in various ways. You saw the civil rights movement, you saw a feminist movement, you saw an environmental movement that was, beginning to kind of take environmental issues more seriously for kind of the first time. That before this point, environmental issues were kind of seen as wealthy people, bourgeois sort of concerns. And people were connecting environmentalism to things like civil rights and feminism and all, and environmental justice issues. And then finally, the peace movement, of course, because of all the Cold War buildup and the patterns of wars through U.S. intervention and all. So you saw a lot of movements pop up during this time period to tackle these various issues. And what they all kind of learned one by one is that while they were able to get some traction within the Democratic Party, there were civil rights laws that were passed, right? There were environmental laws passed. The EPA was created. Eventually the war in Vietnam was ended, and we saw a lot of change in these policies. What happened though was that the drive for those policies were these popular movements that were engaged in active struggle, occupying, in the case of the environmental movement, occupying sites of nuclear facilities where they were going to build nuclear power, and they'd be occupied to where they couldn't build it, and eventually they'd have to back off and cancel the project. You saw the massive, huge, million-man march sort of thing with for civil rights that really put pressure on Congress and officials to act. So all of these changes happened, but they happened because of this real activist drive, this independent activist drive outside of the parties, outside of the electoral system that was really putting pressure on that change. And what they all found was that when that started to change, and a lot of it came from the Democratic Party kind of adopting sort of these things and passing some laws, they got some initial reform, they got some initial relief. But then when they started pushing in the Democratic Party for more, the Democratic Party resisted that. What you saw were these movements became co-opted by the Democratic Party. They were co-opted so that they could be crushed, so that they could be stalled, so that they couldn't actually get any forward momentum beyond some reform. Because to go beyond that reform meant having to address the underlying issues of capitalism and things like that the Democratic Party does not want to do. So the Democratic Party co-opted and suppressed those movements. So what happened was all of those movements, as they saw this happen in the Democratic Party, the conversation started to turn into, well, the way we were getting traction was by being independent. So we need to be independent again. We have to have an independent political party that's going to support all of our movement goals. Because the Democratic Party isn't. The Democratic Party is saying all the words, like Chris was saying, right? Like, it's got all the words. They co-opted all the leftist language and everything so that they could try to speak and sound like they're on our side. But their actions are totally different. Their actions do not match their words. Their actions show that they're actually suppressing and resisting what movements are asking for. So conversation shifted toward forming a new independent party. And leaders from all of these movements, from the civil rights movement, feminist movement, environmental movement, peace movement, started to correspond and get together and talk to each other, starting around the late 1970s, early 1980s. And that was where you started to see things like the Green Committees of Correspondence form, where you saw folks between states and between movements start to correspond with each other about this issue, talk about independent politics. And it was partly pushed forward because green movements for green political struggle were starting to happen around the same time period around the world. They started in New Zealand, I believe, where folks ran for local office to prevent destruction of a forest and destruction of like indigenous land and all for some development project. I don't remember exactly all the details, but it was something like that. And that was very successful at campaigning around ecological issues and indigenous rights and things like that. So other countries began to say, hey, we should develop our own green programs. And the German Greens, or folks got together in Germany and created a German Green Party that was very successful and got a bunch of folks elected to the National Green Party. The National German Parliament. And that really set off a wave of creating green parties around the rest of the world, including in the US. So you saw this conversation come up about, how do we form a green party around a green set of principles, such as environmental, ecological policy, civil rights policy, feminism policy, peace, anti-war policy. That conversation grew in the 1980s, and in 1984 was the first national convention hosted by the Institute for Social Ecology that helped create the Green Party. Essentially, it was the first big national meeting where representatives from all of these movements came together and talked about, hey, maybe we should establish a Green Party. And that eventually led to the formation of the first Green Party, which was the Greens Green Party USA in 1991, where they formed a national Green Party that was heavily emphasized on activism and political education, political outreach. There's a picture of it over on the right there from C-SPAN from, August 27th, 1991, where the announcement of the founding of the Green Party happened. You can actually watch that clip on C-SPAN today. I highly encourage you to do it. It's not very long. It's about 30 minutes, I think. But it's very interesting because it shows you the Green Party's principles since 1991 that haven't changed. And also it shows you that the critiques that they had of the Democrats and Republicans also haven't changed. Those parties are just as bad as they were back then. And of course, emergencies like the climate emergency and all have only gotten worse since then. So, the need for a Green Party is as important as ever. But like I said, that original Green Party was focused more on activism. And so another wing of the Green Party came up known as the Association of State Green Parties that was more electoral focused. And they ended up drafting and recruiting Ralph Nader to run for president. So you saw the Nader campaign in 1996 run, and it got a lot of national attention. Nader was a very well-known figure, so a lot of folks came to find out more about the Green Party because of him. And those two movements essentially started talks with each other and said, we need to combine forces here instead of splitting the Green Movement. So I'll spare you some of the details of that that messy sort of history, but effectively what happened was those two different Green parties merged together into the Green Party of the United States in 2000, which is the Green Party that everyone knows today. So because of that history, you could see how both the activism and the electoral sides literally merged together to form the Green Party of the United States. So it's always been in kind of the history and the DNA of the party to have those two wings and to try to merge them together, try to see how you can use them together to grow a movement.